Ecclesiastes, book of Ecclesiastes. Here's what it looks like in Hebrew. Koheleth. All right, Koheleth. Koheleth. Koheleth means preacher. All right. Now, does anybody, all of you Greek scholars here, where's David? Where are you, David? There you are. You've had 8 years of Greek from me. All right, Iglesia. Spanish.
Church.
Iglesia, church. Ecclesia.
One's called out.
All right, one's called out. What does it mean? One's called out. Ecclesiastes now. The book of Ecclesiastes was now almost all of the Old Testament. The names for the books are not taken from Hebrew. Did you know that? They're almost all taken from the Greek Septuagint. What is the name of the book of Genesis in Hebrew?
Bara.
What?
I thought it was Bara.
Well,
No, that's beginning.
That's
No, it'd be
Barashit.
Barashit.
Barashit. It begins off in Genesis 1:1, Barashit, Bara, Elohim, Et Hashemin, we et Haaretz. All right? It usually in the Old Testament books, it talks, the first word in the book, they will name the book after. Well, when they translated that into Greek, it came from the Greek word genomai, and we get our word Genesis from it, which means beginning. All right? Beginning. And the book of Genesis actually means in beginnings, plural. Not in beginnings, singular, but in beginnings, Barashit is plural word. All right? In beginnings, created God. The word created there means created and finished, absolutely finished, brought to complete perfection. The heavens and the earth, and the word heavens, Hashemayim, means the whole universe. And then it says he created the whole universe, and then he placed the earth in exactly the right spot. Haaretz, the earth. All right? That's beautiful. When you get it from the original language like that, it just turns on lights. You open doors there that you don't see normally at all. David? You want to come over here and wrestle this machine for me? My old cameras are worn out. It may stay, it may not stay. Keep trying to zoom in. Well, in the book of Ecclesiastes, the word Ecclesiastes comes from the word ecclesia, okay, which means church. One's called out or assembled. Can you flip that back over if it ever stays so I can see, so make sure it's having fits? Ecclesiastes. Now this is the way you write it in Greek. That's what it looks like in the Greek Septuagint. Now when Alexander the Great conquered basically the whole... There we go again. The Jews basically laid their Hebrew down at that period of time and started speaking Koine Greek. And what does Koine Greek mean?
Universal.
Universal language. That was a universal language of the whole world at that time. They had about right around 280 to 300 BC, they had the Greek Old, or the Hebrew Old Testament translated into Greek. And from that period of time on, the Jews studied their Bible in Greek, not in Hebrew. And when Jesus came along, when the Messiah was born, right here in time, now, where did this take place? Now, this was right over here, is where this 300 BC is, okay? And then Jesus comes along, and what language is Jesus speaking to his disciples?
Greek.
Greek. All right? And almost all of the Bible that he quotes when he's preaching, we have 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, telling us about Jesus' ministry, okay? And almost always he is speaking in Greek to his disciples. Now, I know we have that movie come out called The Passion, and it had it speaking in Aramaic. That's not correct. I don't know who the scholars were on that, but they blew it. They did speak Aramaic at times, but the language that was common among everybody. All the commerce was done in Greek. The Roman coins were printed in what language?
Greek, Caesar.
Greek. Not Latin, in Greek. When Jesus was crucified, they took a plaque and put it up behind him, and it said, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. It was written in Latin, it was written in Greek, and it was written in Hebrew. Okay? Who wrote it?
Herod.
No. Who wrote the
Pilate.
inscription on the cross? Who?
Pilate.
Pontius Pilate. He knew those languages and he wrote it down there, and then the Jews asked him, don't say that. Say that he said he was the
Right.
King of the Jews. He said, I have written what I have written. Because he tried to turn him loose 5 times. He had declared him innocent. Okay? So now we come up to Ecclesiastes. Why did I chase all these rabbits to get here? Because the name Ecclesiastes comes from the Greek Septuagint. And what it means is a sermon. It means sermon. That's what it means. It means a sermon, or a message, or a debate. Okay? And basically almost all sermons are a debate, a one-sided debate, basically. Did you know that? Almost all sermons are an apology. Apologetics. That comes from Greek. Apo, all right, and lego. All right, apologetics. And now we're going to talk about the book of Ecclesiastes. Okay? This is a debate. This is a sermon. He was called the preacher, the Koheleth in Hebrew, but it's Ecclesiastes in Greek Septuagint. And who's the author? When I first came to the Areopagus class, by the way, what does Areopagus mean?
That's the place where Paul prayed or
Oh,
something.
what does Areopagus mean?
Mars Hill.
Mars Hill. It means Mars Hill. Okay? That's what the name. I didn't name this class. I was coming to this class. There was a teacher here, and they had we've been plagued sometimes by people that come in the class that think they know a lot. And anyway, Tracy Strawn was a teacher, and he was a good teacher, but he was teaching the book of Ecclesiastes. And this guy had been educated in a very liberal seminary, and he didn't believe the book of Ecclesiastes was inspired by God at all. And he was giving Tracy a bunch of hard trouble, so Tracy had me get up and talk for him, because I was a doctor, you know. Called the doctor on the scene, and I got up and talked a little bit about it. We don't really know for sure who wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. Everybody says Solomon wrote it. There are a lot of things about Solomon here, but some Bible scholars don't know whether Solomon wrote it or not. But it is inspired of God. All right. Now, who wrote the book of Hebrews in the New Testament? Who wrote it? We don't know. It wasn't Paul. Many of your books will say Paul wrote it. In the King James Version, it says Paul was the writer. But Paul was not the writer of the book of Hebrews. But whoever the writer was, he was inspired of God. That was a fantastic book. Okay? Let's look at Ecclesiastes. Now, we're going to go over this in a kind of an oversight. We're going to look over it like from an airplane at high speed. All right? It's this is a book. Many people think it is a very depressing book, because it'll say something. It'll say like everything under the sun is vanity, 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 and it talks about all of it. It begins out in Genesis or Ecclesiastes 1:1. The futility of all endeavors. The words of the preacher, the son of David, a king in Jerusalem. All right. Vanities of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What advantage does a man have in all his work, which he does under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, and the earth remains the same forever. All right? People's lifetimes. How many is the oldest person that you know? Who's the oldest person you know? How many has lived the longest of anybody you know?
100.
I knew an old cowboy. Remember Mr. Ragsdale's riding academy down there where I used to live? You know, I was his bronc rider down there. And there was an old cowboy that came in down there, and he never drove a car, he never got a driver's license. He was 100 and something years old. And he lived during the Civil War, and this old guy's name was Allen. And he rode this sorrel horse down there, and the horse was about as old as he was. He'd come down there and he'd say, "I want a red soda water." He'd go over there, and Mr. Ragsdale had an old soda pop machine that had water in it, and you'd put a nickel in the thing and have to get the water, the soda water out of there and put it in it. It'd give you a bottle of soda pop out of this water machine, and we sat out there in 120 degree in the shade, and he drank his soda water and tell me about the old things. I used to like to listen to the old timers, but he was 100 and something years old. But when it comes to the humanity has been on this earth about 6,000 years. That's it. And there's a whole lot of people lived in that 6,000 years, and they've come and gone. And most of the people in the world are forgotten.
Well,
Absolutely.
They'll say millions all the time.
Huh?
Our anatomy teacher, he corrected himself. He said millions. He said, no, thousands. But most teachers
We
will always
have
say millions.
basically, if you study archaeology, which I have, in Fish Lake Valley where I used to live, there was 2 caves up there that had 6,000 years of occupation basically. That goes all the way back to Adam's time. You go back up there, the oldest bristlecone pines in the world, and they will go back to, some of them back to Adam's time. Some of those trees. You walk in there and see a tree that when Adam was on the earth. That's pretty neat. Anyway, well, generations come and go. Now there's some key verses to this, 2:24, 8:15, 5:18, and 9:7 through 9. And basically that's what it all talks about. Now, Solomon, if he wrote this book, okay, we don't know for sure that he did. I kind of believe he did. In 1 and verse 12, the futility of wisdom now, he says. I, the preacher, have been king over Jerusalem, and I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. It's a grievous tax which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. I've seen all the works of which have been done under the sun. Behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. How many of you ever caught the wind?
Just in my lungs.
That's when it talks about wind. Now, wind in Hebrew is what? What's the term?
Come on, Dave.
Ruach. Say ruach.
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 I thought that was
See
a
how it
spirit.
breathes out? Ruach.
I thought that was spirit.
Well, same thing.
Oh, okay.
In the New Testament, what is the Greek word?
Now me.
Pneumatos or pneuma. Pneuma. We got a word pneumatic tools and stuff, air tools. Okay? You go to the dentist and he has air tools down there grinding on your teeth with. All right, striving after wind. Okay? And he starts here in chapter 2, he says, the futility of pleasure and possessions. We, back in the book of Genesis, the first 11 chapters tells you the whole history of the human race. Did you know that? The whole history of the human race. It talks out, and there after we get in, we have Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Basically, the rest of the races, there's 3 basic races, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, okay? That's Noah's 3 sons. They would populate the world. And we find out that basically, after this period of time, it just forgets the rest of the world and only talks about the descendants of Shem. But the descendants of Shem would be administrators of God's kingdom until the Jesus came on the earth. And then the Jews would reject their Messiah, and God would turn to the Gentiles to be the administrators, and we live in the Gentile church age today. All right? And the Gentile church age would end with total capitalism. That's what the Bible says. Total greed and wanting to mass wealth. Okay? And the church age, according to the book of Revelation also, the Laodicea. What does Laodicea mean?
I knew that one.
Laodicea. It comes from Laos and Dikia. In Greek, it means people justice. They did what was right in their own eyes. And the church has changed and gone toward the world. at the end of the church age that said, you can't tell the world from the church. And they think they are rich, but they are what?
Poor.
They are poor. All right. Now Solomon, he tells the same thing here. I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure. And so enjoy yourself, and behold, it too was all futility. Okay? I said of laughter, it is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? And I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body. How do you stimulate your body?
Well, you could drugs, maybe, or you could do it.
Alcohol,
Yeah.
drugs, and sexual pleasure and excitement. Even what excited the Romans in their time? What excited the Romans?
Killing people?
Huh?
Killing people at the
Well, yeah, it was violence, wasn't it? Violence. And the thrill of killing and maybe being in danger. Being in danger. Well, the gladiators. But what do you have on television today? Almost every show is a show of violence and intrigue where your heart pounds. Thrills! Thrills! And the Bible says there is no end to this. This is futility. All right?
No.
I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine. That's alcohol. How many of your families have been touched by alcoholism? Both hands. All right. Both hands. All right. My mind was guiding me wisely and how to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do all under heaven the few years of their lives. And I enlarged my works. Now I have built big mansions. He built mansions. He built fantastic stables. Everything. I mean, all of this. I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself, and I planted vineyards for myself, and I made gardens, and I made pleasure parks. I made amusement. That word means amusement parks. Do we have amusement parks that are just drawing people by the thousands today? Boy, this is history before it happened, isn't it? Let's think about this for a while. Mankind has been absolutely... Somebody turned the heat cooler on. Yes, it is. What happens is if you turn it on instead of auto, it'll blow cold air from outside in. All right, amusement parks. I enlarged my works with houses. I had amusement parks. I planted all kinds of gardens, and I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. Who was one of the very first men to plant to make a world famous garden?
Adam.
No. Well, God did.
Was it Nebuchadnezzar?
That's the Garden of Eden. All right, paradise, paradiso, in Greek. The word comes from Chaldean, Persian, into Hebrew, into Greek, paradiso, and into English, paradiso. What it means, the garden pleasure park. All right, that's what the Garden of Eden was. All right, I made ponds for myself. I planted fruit trees. I irrigated forests and growing trees. And who was the famous one? One of the 7 wonders of the world. Come on, guys, think back in history. What was one of the ancient 7 wonders of the world?
The pyramid was one of them.
Nebuchadnezzar?
Pyramids, yes, but what was one of the
Nebuchadnezzar?
pleasure parks?
The garden in Babylon.
The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which Nebuchadnezzar built. And what happened to Nebuchadnezzar after he built his big pleasure park?
They use it for firewood?
What happened to Nebuchadnezzar when he built his big pleasure park? Where he had wild animals, it was amusement park.
I thought he was the one that got burned.
God turned him mad, and he went out there for 7 years and ate grass like a cow. There's the futility of all of your massing of wealth. Okay, God just keeps showing us this over and over and over again. That ought to make us think today. Okay, I bought male and female slaves. What was the curse on Adam in the garden? What was the curse that God placed on Adam? By the sweat of your nostrils you will
No work.
Earn your bread. By the sweat of your nostrils is what it literally says in Hebrew. By the sweat, we're in the book of Ecclesiastes, Dr. John. And how did Cain's descendants get out of all of this hard labor? You remember when Cain killed Abel? What was the curse to him? That the ground would be doubly cursed because of him. Thorns and thistles would grow. They didn't have any thorns and thistles before this. He indentured people to slavery. And he built, remember, his descendant built the Tower of Babel. All right, the Babylonians. All right, later on. The language were human government, the flood and all this. They tried to overcome the curse of the earth. Slavery. I bought slaves and I had home-born slaves. And he said, I possessed large herds and large flocks, and all more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. What is the ancient name for Jerusalem? What's an ancient name for Jerusalem now?
Judah?
Huh? No. What's the ancient name for Jerusalem? When Abraham went to Jerusalem, what was it called? It was called Salem, and it also was called Jebus, the Jebusites. Jebus. Okay? I collected for myself, what? Number 8. What's number 8? Doris, are you over? Young man, you over there? Number 2 and verse. You're filling out stuff. All right. Anna.
I collected great sums of silver and gold, the treasure of many kings and provinces.
All right. I collected gold and silver and all kinds of treasures. I provided for myself male and female singers, lots of vocal music. Do people like music today? I think some of the music people like today is just lots of noise. Female singers and male singers, pleasures of men, and many what? Many beautiful women.
Yay, no fun.
How many wives does Solomon have? If this was Solomon, how many wives does Solomon have?
He had like 1,000, right? Or 800?
How many? Now, let's think.
700.
He had 700 wives and 300 concubines, which were wives also. They just didn't have any, their children didn't have any inheritance.
So 1,000.
And so how many did he have altogether?
1,000.
No.
700.
No.
How, you said 300.
How many 700 and 300? That's advanced mathematics. Now, I know it's hard on you. 700 and 300. That's 1,000.
That's 1,000.
But how many wives did he have?
That's 700.
1,001. Who was the other one? The Queen of Sheba.
Oh. You always get me in this detail stuff, Jim.
I make you think. One of my teachers says, think it's a good trick if you can do it. All right. Pleasure. And he said, and all that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. Gold and silver and his pleasure parks and his amusement parks and all of this. For my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. And I considered all of my activities. And verse number 11. Verse number 11. Dr. John, what's it say over there?
Then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and the labor in which I had toiled. And indeed it was vanity, and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun.
Boy, I tell you what, if people would only realize that today, we wouldn't have any wars in the world, would we? Would we? We'd have no use for the Marines and the armies. And one of our greatest fans is the Marines down at Camp Pendleton. They'd be out of business if there was not any greed. But in the human nature, in the Adamic nature, is greed. And we're always here. And we find out in the last age, in the church period, the last period in the church age, it's going to be a materialistic church. But it's going to be poor. Just like Solomon. Solomon was poor.
So you said
He ended up in poverty. Because he was dissatisfied with everything he did. He had all the wealth around him. There are people that go out and they will take a credit card and they will buy everything in sight. And when they get it in their house, they are sitting there bawling. They got great big bills, and they're not happy with what all they have. Solomon did the same thing thousands of years ago. We can take a lesson from him if we will just read the book. All right, just read the book. Boy, wisdom excels folly. Wisdom is worse than folly, he said. The futility of labor in verse number 18. Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor. I hated it. I hated it. He went out and bought him a big screen TV and took it home and smashed it. He was so happy. This man was unhappy. He had everything. And he wrote one time, he said, you know what? I got all these women, and I'd rather eat on a housetop alone with a dry morsel of bread than be down there with all them squalling, arguing women. He said it's like a constant dripping.
It's like a root canal.
Yeah.
He's
Verse number 24 now. Verse number 20. Are you over in David, or your name's David also? Mm-hmm. Ecclesiastes 2 and verse number 24. 2:24. David over here. We got a lot of Davids here.
Man could do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in his work. This too, I see, is from the hand of God.
All right. Now what you get and what you have, everything that you think you work for, that's a gift. Who gave you the health to even get what you got? God. That's all. If you have anything at all, it's by a gift of God. Okay? For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? For to a person who is good in his own sight, he has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, and while to the sinner he has given the task of gathering, collecting, and so that he may give to one who is good in God's sight. And this too is vanity and striving after wind. Now we have, how many of you came here to Buck Owens' funeral? Buck Owens was a very wealthy man. I knew him almost all of my life. I was his neighbor when I was young and everything. He was extremely frugal. Very
really
frugal.
super wealthy, though.
He was tighter than bark on a tree, so to speak. I remember one time my stepdad was his wife's uncle, and I was in his house a lot of times. And one time he was over there doing a tour in Japan, and he came home, and Phillips was there, and she took me in there, and she said, Jimmy, I want to show you something. It was in the closet. It was a Black Forest cuckoo clock. She bought this over there while on a shopping trip over there in Germany, and she never put it on the wall because she was afraid Buck would get mad. Because he didn't believe in throwing money away. I remember when they moved up on Panorama, she came in there, and she was the most happiest, smiliest person you ever saw, and just loved life and everything. And I walked in her house up there, and she said, Jimmy, she said, I have an ice cream bar. I want to make you something. She goes in there and makes a banana split and made a milkshake and all kinds of stuff for me. And did put all the stuff on it. She was just all really happy about that. Happy about it. But when Buck died, how much did Buck take with him?
All of it.
How much did he leave behind?
All of it.
All of it. All of it. And this is the first song that they sang at his funeral. The Byrds. You remember who the Byrds were? Back in the 60s, the Byrds.
Yeah, they took a song.
They sang this song.
Out of the Bible.
It's Turn, Turn, Turn. Okay, it came right out of Ecclesiastes, the 3rd chapter. I don't know if we'll get through this book today or not. There is an appointed time for everything. There is a time for every event under the heaven. There's a time for birth and time to die. There's a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted. There's a time to kill and a time to heal. There's a time to tear down and a time to build up, and a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to shun embracing, a time to search and a time to give up as lost. There's a time to keep and a time to throw away. There's a time to tear apart and a time to sew together. There's a time to be silent and a time to speak. There's a time to love and a time to hate. There's time for war and a time for peace. What profit is there to the worker from that in which he has toiled. I have seen the task which his God has given the sons of men, which to occupy themselves. Now here is many people look over this next verse. Number 11. Now I want you to read this and I want you to think about this one. This is outstanding. If you wanted to circle something, yellow it in, red it in, whatever you want to do, this is the verse. Dr. John, number 11. 3 and number 11.
He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in the hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end.
All right. Now what it says here, he has made everything inappropriate in its time. He has set eternity. Lam is the Hebrew word. He has set eternity in the heart of man. What does that mean? He has set eternity in the heart of man.
Just like he's put his, everybody knows that there is a God.
That's right. Romans the 1st chapter.
He's-
God has set in every man something that draws him to God. Even an atheist. Someone that says no God, you know the Bible says that the atheist said in his heart, no God, no God. The atheist has to continue to say in his heart, no God, no God, no God, because his body, his spirit keeps saying there is a God. You have to tell yourself there's no God. You have to try to convince yourself there's no God. Because God set eternity in every man's heart. That he is there. Helen Keller, you know, when they finally could communicate with her, they started trying to tell her about God. She said, I knew about him all the time. She knew God. While the Lakota, the Sioux people here in America, when the so-called preachers came to them and started talking to them out of the book or the Bible, oh, they said, oh yeah, we know him. The Father is Wankantanka. The Son is Sankashila. The Holy Spirit is Skantaku Skanskan. They knew about him. They were glad to hear about him, but these Anglo-Saxons, when they came over here, they made contracts with these Indians, and then they asked God to seal the contract in the pipe, you know. That's where the Indians took the pipe, they put the pipe together, and asked God to come down and be there with them to sign this contract. And they expect it to live forever, the contract, because God's here, and you're here, and the other opposing party's here, and so you may die, I may die, but our children will live on, and God never dies. So they had to keep the contract. But when the white people broke the contract, they said, man, these must be some kind of animals walking around on two legs. They don't have no souls. Don't they believe in God? God has put eternity in all man's life, in all man's heart. When in the San Joaquin Valley right here, there were a lot of Indians here. Buena Vista Lake out there, you used to go out there and pick up beads and stuff where the Indian graveyards were and everything out there. Just they'd go out there and sift those beads and things and find arrowheads all around the big lake that was here. There was this tremendous population of Indians in this valley. A lot of elk and a lot of wild animals, bighorn sheep and all kinds of stuff up in the hills and things. Well, when the white man took over the valley, they run the Indians up in the hills, and the Indians up there starving. And they said, why don't you hunt and fish like the rest of the Indians? And they said, well, our family made treaties with these people many, many years ago. And we made a treaty and we said we wouldn't hunt and fish in their land. Well, your fathers are dead and their fathers are dead and here you are in their land. And they were starving to death. And they said, they died, but God's still alive. He's still here. We can't break that treaty. God has set eternity in every man's heart. Verse number 13. And verse number 12, actually, I know that there is nothing better for them than to rejoice and do good in one's lifetime. To rejoice and do good in one's lifetime. Moreover, that every man who eats and drinks and sees good in all his labor, it is a gift of God. How many of you ever heard of Jesse Chisholm? Our Uncle Willie used to ride with Jesse Chisholm back in Pauls Valley in Indian Territory. Jesse Chisholm was the one that started the Chisholm Trail. Jesse Chisholm was not a white man, he was a Cherokee Indian. And the way he got all of the cattle drives, he's the one that started the Chisholm Trail and the cattle drives. Sam Paul, and there was a guy named Johnson back there. There were big ranchers back in the Indian Territory, and Jesse Chisholm says, I'm going to talk to the Kiowas and the Comanches, and we can have a cattle drive into Kansas, and we can take our cattle down there. Graham's, my great-grandmother, told me that she went into the Paul mansion, and there were big boxes of money there, where there were gold and silver coins, this chest full of them, in her grandfather's house. Well, they had sold $10,000 worth of cattle a year. The man that made that possible was Jesse Chisholm. Jesse Chisholm tried to be a peacemaker among all men back there. Now, he didn't go to church much, but he believed in God. He said when he was on his deathbed, basically, he says, I don't know much about church and I don't know much about the Bible, but I believe in God. And all of my life I have centered around God. God put eternity in his heart. Okay? He said, I've always tried to be a peacemaker. He said, nobody ever came to my home that went away hungry. And the wild Indians and the tame Indians, he said, I always tried to make peace with them. And he said, I know that I will meet my Maker and look at him, and he will say, welcome, brother. He said, I know that because I have done what he told me to do. Even though I didn't have a lot of information, I believe in him. Jesse Chisholm, he said that he talked to the Comanches and the Kiowas, and they said, we'll let you drive cattle through here, but he said, don't you use any white men, and sure no Texans. Don't you let a Texan come through here. If you will use Indian cowboys and black cowboys and Mexican cowboys, we'll let you drive the cattle through. But don't you use a white one or a Texan, because they're going to kill the buffalo when they come by. They're just going to be shooting animals and leaving them. And he said, we don't like them. And so that's how the cattle drives were started. Old Jesse Chisholm. God had put eternity in his heart, and he was a great go-between and arbitrator between tribes and between treaties in many, many years. Rejoice in one's own lifetime. Moreover, that every man who eats, drinks, and sees good in all his labor, it is a gift of God. And I know everything God does will remain forever. Every time I try to send you out of the class, I say, do what?
Do something eternal.
Go out and do something eternal. Everything that you physically do and work and amass for wealth in this world is futility, people. I'm not telling you to be a lazy bum. I'm not telling you to go quit working or anything like that. You got to put a roof over your head. You got to eat and take care of yourself. But the only thing that you ever do that you're going to take to heaven with you is what you do eternal this week. Whatever you study God, whatever you witness to people, whatever you do for the Lord is what's going to take with you. You're going to take that with you. So go out and do something eternal. Verse number 14. Doris, what's your son's name?
Is that chapter 3?
Yes. Chapter 3 and verse number 14. Are you there?
Tyson.
Tyson, could you read that 14 for me?
I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it, and nothing taken from it. God does it, that men should fear before him.
All right, men should fear God. The word fear God what it means in the original language is handling yourself carefully before him. So many people are reckless in character, aren't they? Reckless in character. Now, verse number 15. Doris, are you there? Can you read 15 for me?
That which hath been is now, and that which is to be hath already been, and God requireth that which is past.
All right, what it means here is that no matter what you see in the world, no matter what happens in the world, nothing new is under the sun. There's nothing new under the sun. You know that Adam knew more about the physical universe and everything than you know today. God educated him. He showed him the map of the stars and everything else out there. He told him all about it. He named every animal and every creature. And I think God even told him about the little bacteria and everything. He knew it all. Verse number 16, David, are you there? 16, 3:16?
I'm
You want to
sorry.
read that? No?
I can do it.
Oh, okay. Furthermore, I have seen under the sun that in the place of justice there is wickedness. In the place of justice, now where is that?
In the quarter?
1415 Truxton Avenue.
Well, that's
We know where that is. That the justice down there is bought with dollars. I'm telling you.
Oh, it is.
If you've been there, you know what I'm talking about.
No, that Jingle's
You got enough money, you can do something down there. Forget it otherwise. Well, who said this now? This is written thousands of years ago. Nothing's changed. In a place of, there is wickedness in a place of righteousness. The word righteous there means a place of justice. That's a judgment hall. And there is wickedness. And I said for myself, God will judge both the righteous man and the wicked man for a time and for every matter, for every deed there is. All right, well, God's going to take care of it. The only justice that you're ever going to get on this earth, basically, is the fact to know that God, in the end, is going to take care of it all. That's it. He's going to take care of it. Chapter number 4, evils of oppression. People oppress each other. Governments oppress each other. When God designed government to begin with, right over here, that was in Noah's time. When he designed government, what was the basics for government? What was the basic reason for government? What does it say back there?
Responsibility, a promise, I don't know.
There was a responsibility also.
To protect the people.
The government was to protect the people from the outlaws. Because God knew that there would be outlaws in every government. And the people that killed each other, they were supposed to kill them. Capital punishment. Okay? That was it. That would scare people if they know, and they have public executions and everything there, they know that that will scare people into behaving. And if you get somebody like Charles Manson, or out there, or whatever, you just put them away and get rid of them. They won't multiply. When you cut them off, they don't multiply. All right. And you protect the people from each other, and you protect the people from the government. The people have to be protected from the government, too. We got a lot of governments in the world today, don't we? And they're all pushing and shoving and scratching and biting, and
They're all
they're all over the world right now. All pushing and shoving and grabbing. Evils of oppression. Verse number 2 and 3 of chapter 4. And I congratulated the dead. I congratulated the dead, who are already dead, more than the living, who are the living. But better than often both of them is the one who has never existed, who has never seen the evil and activity that is under the sun. And he's talking about all those that were oppressed in so many nations. In many places it's better you were never born. I've seen that every labor, every skill that is done is the result of what? Warring and rivalry. And between a man and his neighbor, and to his vanity and striving after wind. The fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. He said that the lazy man will sit there and fold his hands and sleep, and I ought to do this today, but I'll just sit here. I'll just sit here. The laziness never gets anything done. Consumes his own flesh. One handful of rest is better than 2 fistfuls of labor and striving after wind. And I looked, and again, vanity under the sun. Number 8. There was a certain man without a dependent, having neither son or brother. Yet there is no end to all his labor. Indeed, his eyes were not satisfied with his riches, and he never asked. And for whom am I laboring and depriving myself of pleasure? This too is vanity and a grievous task. I've known many people. Have you ever heard of somebody that was extremely wealthy and they lived in absolute poverty and in rags?
Sam Walton. Well, I don't know if he lived in rags, but he wasn't living no high life.
I mean living in rags. They deprived themselves of something. I knew an old man and a woman. One of them lived on Nile Street, and the other guy lived out there in South Bakersfield. Two brother and sister. This old antique cassette recorder sometimes is the only thing that works. And now it's not wanting to work. Maybe it will. I went to a restaurant one time and they were setting up at the bar because they didn't want to leave they had a counter, a lunch counter, and then they had seats. They would sit at the lunch counter because they were not going to leave a tip. No way. My mother knew one of them very well, and she took him to different places and with her, and they would go into a restaurant, and it was his turn to buy. You know, they buy one time, he'd buy, and he would not leave a tip. He would never leave a tip. And he'd always insult the waitress. Make her cry or something.
That'd be his justification.
That was his justification. And I walked into this restaurant over here, and my wife and everything, she said, "Who are those street people over there? Boy, they smell." They were in rags. Just rags. I said, "Those are two of the richest people in Bakersfield." Rags. Living in rags. What did Solomon say about that? There was an old woman back in New York someplace, and she lived and she died. She never went to the doctor or anything, and she died in her hotel room or building, and they found just absolutely just boxes and boxes full of money. She froze to death because she wouldn't turn on the heat. There was a farmer out there by me, and he was so tight. His family, I mean, he raised them up, and I mean, they went without. And when he was old, almost 100 years old, he was set in his little room in a house, and he had him put a light bulb down where he would sit and eat his dinner and would read. That light bulb was the only heat that he would spend time on in the house. He'd sit there and huddle up around the light bulb.
That's crazy.
Now, that's what the Bible says this. And where did he go? How much of it did he take with him? How much did he leave behind?
All
of it. Okay. Your attitude toward God. Guard your steps to the house of God, 5 and verse 1. And draw near and listen, rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools. And they do not know they are doing evil. The fools don't know they are doing evil sometimes. Do not be hasty in your word or impulsive in your thought to bring up a matter in the presence of God. For God is in heaven, and you are on earth, and therefore let your words be few. Folly of riches. 5 and verse 10 onward. And verse number 18. Tyson, are you over there? Verse 5 and 18? 5:18. This is another key verse. He just repeats this over and over again. Now, if he repeats it, it means it's real important, okay? All right. 5:18, Tyson.
Here's what I have seen. It is good and fitting for one to eat and drink and to enjoy the good of all his labor in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life, which God gives him.
All right.
For it is his heritage.
That's right. This is your reward. What you eat and what you drink, your food and eat that you have today, that's your reward, people. That you have a roof over your head, and that you have a lunch to eat, and a breakfast to eat, and a dinner to eat. And if you can eat it, you're real lucky. Just consider it a gift of God. This is your reward. Furthermore, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he has empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. This is a gift of God. Chapter number 6. Chapter number 6. The futility of life. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and is prevalent among many men, all men actually is what it said. A man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, and that his soul lacks nothing that he desires, but God has not empowered him to eat from them, and a foreigner enjoys them, and this is vanity under the sun. This is what we were talking about a while ago. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, however many they may be, and his soul is not satisfied with good things, that he is not even have a proper burial. Marilyn, can I get your attention for just a minute? Did you know of J. Paul Getty?
My dad did.
Yes. What did J. Paul Getty do when he went out to the oil fields? Instead of going to a hotel where a nice bed is and everything else and everything, what did he do?
He slept in the tool house.
He slept in a doghouse.
Tool house.
That's what they call a doghouse.
No, I know. I'm just flipping it.
The tool house is the doghouse. That's where they got old benches where you go change clothes in. He slept there and he'd eat a bologna sandwich. That's what he did. All right? And when he died,
Mega rich.
and he was real rich, people. I want you to know that man.
That
was really
museum
rich.
up there, the J. Paul Getty, you seen it, right?
Yep.
In LA? It's like the biggest museum in the world.
All right. Now, Marilyn, when he died, his family wouldn't even buy him a proper casket, would they? What did they do to him?
Shortening.
They cut his legs off and so he could put in this little old casket. They chopped him up. He couldn't even have a proper burial. The futility of it. Number 7, chapter number 7. Wisdom and folly contrasted. Good name is better than good ointment. The day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth, and it really should be. You should have done something eternal in your life if you spent your life doing anything. Shouldn't you? It is better to go to a house of mourning, to a funeral. It's better to go to a funeral than to a party. Think about that one for a while. It's better to go to a funeral because you celebrate the person's life if he was a good person. Because this is the end of every man, and the living that takes it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter. And when a sad face is sad, heart is happy. When you go to a funeral of a good man, you're sad, but yet you're happy that he lived and had a part in your life, don't you? It's better than just going to a party and dancing and fooling around, is what it says. Number 5, it is better to listen to the rebuke of a wise man than for one to listen to the song of fools. This is some real hard lessons today. I'm going to tell you something that'll just jar your thinking. But this is God. Do not be eager in your heart to be angry. Don't get mad quick.
That's hard to do sometimes.
For anger resides in the bosom of fools.
That's hard to do sometimes.
That's right. The anger resides in the bosom of fools. Number 12. For wisdom is a protection, just as money is a protection. But the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the lives and of its possessors. Consider the work of God. For who is able to straighten what God has bent? Verse number 15, again. Verse number 15. Tyson, do you want to read that again?
I have seen everything in my days of vanity. There is a just man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs his life in wickedness.
All right. I have seen everything during my lifetime. There is a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness. And there is a wicked man who prolongs his life by wickedness. There is an old story, only the good die young. Have you heard of that? This is where it comes from. Only the good die young. And there's another old little saying, it says the devil takes care of his own. You ever heard that one too? Yeah. There's where these both come from, is this right here. All right. Do not be excessively wicked. Do not be a fool. Why should you die before your time? In verse number 18 it says, "It is good that you should grasp one thing and not let go of another, for the one who fears God comes forth with both of them. Wisdom strengthens a wise man more than 10 rulers who are in the city." And then Romans 3:23. This is a forerunner of it. "Indeed, there is not a righteous man on earth who continually does good and who never sins." Proverbs, Jeremiah said the same thing. Romans, Paul used it. "I decided in my mind," in verse number 25, "to know, to investigate, and to seek wisdom and explanation, and to know the evil of folly and the foolishness of madness. And I discovered more bitter than death the woman whose heart is a snare, like nets, like a trap." Women can trip you up, can't they?
Yes, they can.
That's right. How many women did he have? 1,001.
He must have been a very busy man.
He was a very sad man.
Can never make them all happy
That's
on
a
one
good
day.
idea. Now he said to find a good man. Remember, we studied Proverbs, and who wrote the last proverb there that we looked at? Bathsheba.
Okay.
This was a teaching. It wasn't Solomon. This was Bathsheba teaching her son how to find a good woman. All right? He said, "The death of a woman whose heart is worse than death, than the woman whose heart is snares and nets, and whose hands are chains. And one who is pleasing to God will escape from her, but the sinner will be captured by her. Behold, I have discovered," says the preacher, "adding one thing to another to find an explanation, which I am still seeking, but have not found. I have found one man among 1,000." By the way, in the original language, who is righteous. And he said, "I'm still looking for a woman." He's really hard on women today. He said, "One man in 1,000 is righteous, but I haven't found a single woman. I haven't found it." He said, "I'm still looking for one." And how many wives did he have? 1,001. All right. "But I have not found a woman among all of these." He had woman trouble, didn't he? Woman trouble. "Behold, I found only this, that God made men upright, but they have sought out many evils and devices." Genesis 1:26, and God created man in his own image, didn't he? And verse number 11, this is human government. Human government. "Because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed quickly, therefore the hearts of the sons of men among them are given fully to do evil." If you don't have law and order, you have problems. Go down in Mexico right now. What's going on in Mexico right now?
It's a labor war.
I mean, we have a war down there. I mean, you go down there, and if you get out of there alive, my neighbor went down to Mexico, and they stole all his money. My son works with a guy, and these bandits down there captured his sister and sent him a letter up here in the United States and said, "Send us money, or we'll send you pieces of your sister."
They're going to send pieces anyway.
If you don't have law and order, you have absolute trouble. "Although a sinner does evil 100 times and may lengthen his life, I still know that it will be well for those who fear God, who fear him openly." Again, in verse number 15. Well, actually in verse 14. "Sometimes," he said, "righteous man, what should ought to happen to a righteous man happens to the deeds of the wicked. And what happens to the wicked men happens to the righteous." You ever known a good man get killed by a dirty rat?
Dirty rat.
Verse number 15. "So I commended pleasure, for there is nothing good for a man to do under the sun except eat, drink, and be merry, and this will stand by him in his toils." You know, when you go out and work hard all day long, you come home and you eat and you have a good dinner. That's your reward, people. If you can sit down there in a nice, soft chair, if you can sleep in a good bed, that's your reward. That's what your reward is. Well, we're gonna have to give up right here, and we're gonna have to come back here in chapter 9 next week. I can't go any further. We will, the rest of the book of Ecclesiastes is good also. Now, you heard all kinds of stuff about the philosophy of man, and you heard about what the righteousness of God is, and what really we should strive after. And basically, he told the whole history of mankind before it ever happened. And the Bible just repeats over and over again. If you go back in the book of Genesis, it tells the whole history of mankind there, what will happen to them. And here we are living it in space and time. And one man says, if a man does not study history, he is a fool and bound to repeat it. And what are we doing?
Repeating it.
Over and over.
We're repeating Vietnam.
And over
We
and
had,
over.
that's like 40 years ago. We're already repeating that stuff.
That's right.
We don't have to go back that far.
Study history. Brother David, it's good to have you back.
It's good to be back.
Are you going to come up here and finish?
My assistant's going to help
Well,
me,
Your
yeah.
assistant's going to come up?
and then I'm going to take over the second half.
Okay, all right, then. It's good to have two of you doing this. Brother
We're gonna
Brett, it's
change
good to have
up
you.
today.
Thank you, David, for coming here today. It's good to have you in the class.
Dave's in my anatomy class.
Oh, and you're anatomy.
Yeah. And we're going to get Dr. T in here pretty soon. We hope.
Do what?
We hope we can get Dr. T in here. Dr. Thomas. Okay, so our announcements today, guys.